You're out. Don't come back. This family is moving on without you. That was my mother's voice. It wasn't screamed. It wasn't choked with tears or trembling with sudden, uncontrollable rage. It was calm. It was practiced. It was delivered with the terrifying, sterile precision of a surgeon amputating a limb. The words came through a voicemail she left at exactly 9:47 on a Tuesday night in late autumn. There had been no argument preceding it. There was no explosive dinner table fight where plates were shattered and decades of resentment boiled over. There were no slammed doors, no tearful ultimatums, no final, desperate attempts at communication. There was absolutely no warning. There was just a 31-second message compressed into a digital audio file that effectively erased 27 years of being the dutiful daughter. 27 years of being the one who paid their bills, covered their sudden emergencies, swallowed my own pride, and quietly, desperately kept the entire Coleman family standing. I was sitting in my apartment in Center City, Philadelphia. Outside, the wind was howling through the concrete canyons of the city, rattling the window panes with a bitter, biting chill that signaled the death of the season. But inside my small, meticulously organized living room, the silence was absolute. It was the kind of silence that rings in your ears after a bomb goes off. I sat cross-legged on my sofa, the blue light of my laptop screen casting long, sharp shadows against the wall. I held my phone in my hand, the screen still glowing with the notification icon. I pressed the play button again. You're out. Don't come back. This family is moving on without you. I listened to it a second time, then a third. I watched the playback bar slide methodically from left to right, listening closely, not just to the words, but to the negative space around them. I listened for the sharp intake of breath my mother took before delivering the final sentence. I listened for any background noise, the television, the hum of the refrigerator, the sound of my father breathing heavily in his recliner. Nothing. She had isolated herself to make this call. It was a planned execution. For 10 solid minutes, I didn't move. I just sat there, letting the ambient noise of my upstairs neighbor's muffled television drift through the ceiling. A laugh track echoed from some late-night sitcom, a surreal soundtrack to the moment my own flesh and blood quietly voted me off the island. My first instinct, ingrained in me since childhood, was the old one, the pathetic one. Call her back, apologize, beg. Even though I had absolutely no idea what I had allegedly done wrong, my default programming was to ask how to fix it. Smooth things over, patch the cracks, keep the peace at all costs. My thumb hovered over my mother's contact name, but then, something deep inside my chest, a muscle I hadn't used in years, suddenly locked into place. Maybe it was the flat, unemotional tone of her voice, or maybe it was the sheer exhaustion of carrying people who resented my strength. I lowered my thumb. I opened our text message thread, which was filled exclusively with her asking me to transfer money or run errands, and I typed a single word. Okay. 5 letters, a period. I pressed send. The screen showed delivered. Then, nothing. No typing bubbles appeared, no frantic incoming call, just digital silence. And that silence confirmed everything I needed to know. She expected me to chase her. She expected me to drive out to the suburbs in a panic, knocking on the door, weeping on the porch. When I didn't, when I simply agreed to my own exile, she had no script prepared for that. What my family didn't understand, what they couldn't possibly fathom in their boundless arrogance, was that okay was not a white flag of surrender. It was not defeat. It was permission. It was the final, liberating permission I gave myself to stop being their financial safety net. My name is Callista Coleman. I am 27 years old. If you're listening from somewhere far away, drop your city in the comments so I can see how far this has traveled. And please, stay with me until the end. To understand how my family's carefully constructed house of cards collapsed and why their decision to discard me was the most catastrophic mistake they could have ever made, you have to understand what I do for a living. I am a corporate financial risk analyst. My entire career is built on identifying liabilities before they explode. I audit massive portfolios, I track microscopic anomalies and data trends, and I find the quiet, hidden fractures in a corporate foundation before the entire building comes crashing down. Identifying fraud, calculating loss, and projecting catastrophic failure is literally what I am paid a 6-figure salary to do. The dark, bitter irony that my own family was the most toxic, high-risk, unregulated portfolio I had ever managed was not lost on me that night. For the past 6 years, ever since I graduated college a semester early and landed my first corporate job, I had been the invisible pillar holding up the Coleman family facade. We grew up in a picturesque upper middle class suburb. It was the kind of neighborhood where everyone had manicured lawns, 2 cars in the driveway, and secrets they absolutely couldn't afford. My mother, Odessa Coleman, was a woman who built her entire identity, her entire psychological architecture around the perception of perfection. To the outside world, to the neighbors, the PTA, and her church social group, she was the flawless hostess. She was the woman with the perfect home, the perfect taste, and the perfect family. She wore clothes she couldn't afford to impress women she secretly despised. But behind closed doors, Odessa operated on a ruthless system of emotional currency, and my account was always overdrawn. In her eyes, love was not something freely given. It was something that had to be earned, negotiated, and bought, and I was never the favorite. That title belonged exclusively to my younger sister, Brielle. Brielle is 23, though she navigates the world with the breathless, weaponized entitlement of a spoiled toddler. If you looked at Brielle's social media feeds, you would see the carefully curated life of a thriving luxury influencer. You would see designer unboxing videos, aesthetic matcha lattes, luxury resort weekends, and a pristine white SUV. Her captions are always full of words like hustle, blessed, manifesting, and boss babe. What you wouldn't see anywhere on her grid is the person actually financing that delusion. Growing up, the family dynamic was established early and enforced with an iron fist. Odessa painted the roles clearly. Brielle was the beauty, the fragile flower who needed to be protected from the harsh realities of the world. I was the workhorse. I was the one who could handle it. When Brielle failed a high school math class, my father, Corvin, would take her out for ice cream to cheer her up, stroking her hair and telling her that the public school system just didn't understand her creative spirit. Meanwhile, Odessa would march into the school and berate the teacher. My father, Corvin, is a tragedy all his own. He is a quiet, deeply passive man. For my entire life, Corvin Coleman's primary survival strategy has been deafening silence. He is an enabler of the highest order. He survived Odessa's tyrannical moods by simply looking the other way, fading into the wallpaper, and choosing a false, cowardly peace over protecting his oldest daughter. He knew the way I was treated was wrong. I saw it in his eyes sometimes when Odessa would tear into me over some minor infraction. But he would just lower his head, stare at his shoes, and let it happen. His silence was its own form of violence. When I brought home straight A's, the only response I ever got from Odessa was a tight, dismissive nod. "Good," she would say, barely looking up from her magazine. "Keep it up. You'll need academic scholarships because we need to focus our savings on your sister's extracurriculars. She needs a competitive edge." I wasn't loved for who I was. I was valued purely for my utility, and as soon as I entered the workforce and started making real money, the demands shifted from academic excellence to financial subsidization. Sitting in my cold apartment that Tuesday night after sending that text, the initial shock began to wear off. It evaporated, leaving behind the cold, mechanical hum of my analytical brain. Sleep was entirely out of the question. I stood up, walked into my small kitchen, and poured a glass of ice water. The cold grounded me. I walked back to my desk, opened my laptop, and launched a new Excel spreadsheet. I titled the document, Coleman Family Liabilities, Historical Data. I needed to see it. I didn't want estimates. I didn't want to rely on my memory, which Odessa had spent years gaslighting me into doubting. I wanted hard, undeniable numbers. I started pulling up my banking portals, downloading CSV files of my transaction histories from the cloud, filtering by date and recipient. I needed to see the exact numerical value of my sacrifice. Line by line, the reality of my exploited existence materialized on the glowing screen. First, the largest anchor around my neck, the mortgage. 3 years ago, Odessa and Corvin decided they needed to upgrade. The neighborhood we lived in wasn't prestigious enough anymore. Odessa had her eye on a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial in a highly sought-after zip code. The problem was, their credit was a smoldering disaster. A graveyard of maxed-out department store cards, deferred loans, and a history of late payments. No reputable bank would touch them. Odessa had cornered me in the kitchen during a family dinner. I still remember the smell of the roast in the oven and the suffocating pressure in the room. She weaponized her tears with expert precision. "It's for the family," she had pleaded, gripping my hands. "You just need to co-sign. Your credit is perfect. Your name will be on the deed right next to mine. It's an investment for your future too. One day, This house will belong to you and Brielle. You'd be securing our legacy. And I was young, desperate for my mother's elusive approval, and blinded by the deeply ingrained toxic belief that family meant blind, unconditional loyalty. I ignored every instinct my education had given me. I signed. I became the co-signer on the massive loan and the co-owner on the property deed. Almost immediately, the financial reality shifted. Odessa always had an excuse. Corvin's hours were cut. The car needed a new transmission. Brielle needed a deposit for a photography studio to launch her brand. Month after month, the $1,900 mortgage payment defaulted to me. If I didn't pay it, my own immaculate credit score would be destroyed. It was a hostage situation masquerading as a familial obligation. Over 3 years, that mortgage alone totaled $68,400. I typed the number into column C. The keystroke sounded loud in the quiet room. Next line, health insurance. When my father's employer went through a merger and drastically changed their benefits package, the monthly premiums for my parents skyrocketed. Odessa refused to downgrade their coverage to a basic tier because it didn't cover her elective dermatology appointments. Corvin had a minor heart scare that year, and Odessa used it to guilt me into submission. I stepped in, paying $640 a month for a premium private plan. I did it for 2.5 years, $19,200. I added it to the spreadsheet. Next line, Brielle's vehicle, the gleaming white Toyota SUV she paraded online. She had thrown a monumental tantrum when her old sedan broke down, claiming she couldn't possibly show up to influencer events in a junk car. She swore on her life she would pay me back every month. She made exactly one payment of $450 before crying to our mother that I was pressuring her and stifling her creative energy with my demands for money. Odessa called me, furious, telling me to stop being so greedy and unsupportive of my sister's dreams. I ended up covering the lease for 2 years to avoid the car being repossessed under my name, $10,800. Then came the endless litany of emergencies. The sudden plumbing repair before winter. The property taxes they conveniently forgot to save for at the end of the year. The security deposit when Brielle decided she needed her own luxury apartment, only to break the lease 6 months later and move back into the colonial house, the house I was paying for, taking the master suite while I slept on a pull-out couch in the den during my rare visits. I highlighted the final column. I hit the sum formula. The number flashed in bold black text on my screen. I leaned back in my chair, the breath escaping my lungs in a slow, ragged exhale. $147,000. I stared at that number until the zeros began to blur together. $147,000. In 6 years, I had bled out a small fortune. I had sacrificed my own ability to buy a home, to travel, to build a safety net for myself. I had bought my place in a family that had just fired me with a 31-second voicemail. They had extracted my youth, my peace of mind, and my financial foundation. And when they decided I was no longer necessary, they didn't even have the decency to look me in the eye. But as the initial wave of betrayal receded, a different, much sharper feeling took its place. Suspicion. My professional training kicked in, overriding my grief. Why now? That was the question ticking rhythmically in the back of my mind. In my line of work, sudden, drastic actions usually indicate a hidden variable. Odessa was manipulative, cruel, and deeply selfish, but she wasn't stupid. She was a parasite who understood the value of her host. She wouldn't arbitrarily cut off her primary, 6-figure source of income unless she firmly believed she had secured a larger, better, more permanent source. You don't throw away your umbrella unless you are absolutely convinced you found a permanent roof. I needed data. I needed to see the board from their perspective. At 2 a.m., with the city completely silent outside my window, I logged into the joint household checking account I still shared with my parents. This was the hub account I had set up years ago to simplify things. My money went in, and their routine bills, utilities, insurance, the mortgage, were automatically paid out. The dashboard loaded slowly. I immediately navigated to the account settings and profile information. My eyes scanned the contact details, and a cold, heavy knot formed in the pit of my stomach. The primary contact email and phone number had been changed. It was no longer my email address. It was Brielle's. I checked the system timestamps. The change had been initiated and confirmed on Sunday, exactly 48 hours before Odessa left that voicemail. I sat back, steepling my fingers. This wasn't an emotional outburst. This wasn't a family fight that got out of hand. They hadn't just kicked me out, they had systematically begun locking me out of the financial infrastructure I had built. Step 1, change the passwords and contact points. Step 2, remove the target. But changing an email on a checking account wasn't nearly enough to secure their financial future. That account only had what I put into it. There had to be something else, a bigger play. I opened my personal email. I started digging through my inbox, bypassing the work memos and newsletters. I opened my spam and promotional folders, searching for anything from the bank, anything related to the property. And then I saw it. It was an automated, high-priority notification from the premium credit monitoring service tied directly to my Social Security number. Because I work in high-level finance, I maintain airtight security on my personal identity. If anyone even runs a soft credit check on my name, I get a real-time alert. The subject line, buried in my spam folder by some bizarre algorithmic fluke, read, "Credit Inquiry Alert. Action Required. Urgent." I clicked it. The email had been generated that very afternoon at 3:15 p.m., just hours before my mother's phone call. I read the text in the body of the email. A new credit application has been initiated using your Social Security number. Lender: First Guardian National Bank. Type: HELOC, Home Equity Line of Credit. Amount: $100,000. Status: pending final disbursement. I stopped breathing. The ambient noise of the refrigerator humming in my kitchen seemed to fade away into absolute nothingness. I read the words again, tracing the letters with my eyes, letting the sheer, breathtaking audacity of the crime wash over me. A HELOC, a home equity line of credit. My mind raced, connecting the dots with horrifying speed. Over the last 3 years, the real estate market in their prestigious suburb had boomed. The colonial house, the house I had been paying the mortgage on, had appreciated significantly in value. There was well over $150,000 in untouched equity sitting dormant in those walls. Odessa and Brielle weren't just pushing me out of the family. They were attempting to strip the equity out of the house. They were taking out a massive loan against the property to get $100,000 in liquid, tax-free cash. Brielle's influencer debts, Odessa's hidden lifestyle expenses, $100,000 would solve all of it for them. But here's the detail that changed this from a toxic, greedy family dispute into a federal felony. I am the co-owner of the property. In the United States, real estate law is incredibly strict regarding equity. You cannot take out a home equity line of credit on a jointly owned property without the explicit, legally binding, and notarized consent of all parties listed on the deed. Every single owner must sign the application and the final closing disclosures. I hadn't signed anything. I hadn't been consulted. I hadn't received a single piece of mail regarding this loan. I hadn't been in the same room as a loan officer or a notary public. The timeline clicked into place with the terrifying precision of a loaded gun. Brielle and Odessa had filed the paperwork for the loan behind my back. They had somehow pushed it through the initial underwriting process. The bank had sent the final approval notice that afternoon. Believing the money was practically in their hands, believing they had successfully secured their $100,000 payday and no longer needed my monthly drip of cash, Odessa picked up the phone at 9:47 p.m. and threw me away. They thought it was over. They thought they had won the game. What they didn't realize, what their greed had blinded them to, was that a HELOC isn't finalized until the end of the mandatory 3-day rescission period. The money hadn't dropped into their account yet. And far more importantly, they had vastly underestimated the daughter they had spent years treating like a doormat. They thought they were dealing with the desperate, people-pleasing 24-year-old girl who just wanted her mother to love her. They didn't realize they had just committed federal bank fraud against a 27-year-old risk analyst who understood the legal system better than they understood themselves. I closed my laptop. The screen went black, reflecting my own face back at me in the dark apartment. The anger still hadn't arrived. I didn't feel the urge to cry or scream. Running through my veins was something far colder, far more dangerous than anger. It was absolute freezing clarity. They wanted me out of the family. They wanted to erase me from the narrative and take the house I built. Okay. I was going to grant their wish. I was going to walk away, but I was going to pull every single structural pin out of their lives on my way out the door, and I was going to watch their stolen house of cards collapse into dust. The sun rose over Philadelphia not with warmth, but with a flat, gray indifference. The pale light crept across the floorboards of my apartment, illuminating the empty coffee mugs and the scattered printed documents I had spent the entire night pulling from various encrypted portals. I hadn't slept a single minute. My body was running entirely on adrenaline, black coffee, and the terrifying electric clarity that comes when a lifelong illusion finally shatters. For 27 years, I had operated under the fundamental delusion that if I just gave enough, worked hard enough, and sacrificed enough, my family would eventually see my value. I thought my utility would eventually transform into love. But looking at the $147,000 spreadsheet and the glaring credit alert for a fraudulent $100,000 home equity line of credit, I realized the truth. You cannot buy respect from people who only view you as a resource to be mined. I took a cold shower. I stood under the freezing water until my skin was numb, letting it shock my nervous system into total icy submission. I didn't have the luxury of breaking down. I didn't have the luxury of crying into my pillow, mourning the mother I never really had, or the sister who viewed me as collateral damage. Tears are a biological response to pain, but they do not solve financial fraud. I stepped out of the shower, dried off, and put on my armor. A tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white silk blouse, my hair pulled back into a severe, sleek knot. I applied my makeup with the precision of a soldier applying war paint. When I looked in the mirror, the girl who used to flinch at her mother's sharp tongue was gone. In her place was a senior risk analyst ready to dismantle a hostile corporate takeover, because that is exactly what this was. I packed my leather briefcase. Inside went the printed spreadsheet, the bank timestamp logs showing Brielle changing the contact email, the original mortgage deed proving my co-ownership, and the credit alert from First Guardian National Bank. The commute to my firm in the financial district was a blur of gray concrete and honking cabs. When I stepped out of the elevator onto the 42nd floor of my office building, the familiar environment grounded me. Glass walls, the low murmur of high-stakes phone calls, the smell of expensive espresso and ozone from the server rooms. Here, I wasn't Odessa's disappointing, unglamorous daughter. Here, I was Callista Coleman. I was the person executives called when they suspected millions of dollars were hemorrhaging from their supply chains. I walked to my office, shut the heavy glass door, and lowered the blinds. At 9:30 a.m., there was a soft knock. Julian Reed poked his head in. Julian was a senior partner at the firm, a 45-year-old veteran of corporate auditing with silver at his temples and an uncanny ability to read people. He had mentored me since I was a junior associate. He was sharp, fiercely protective of his team, and had an absolute zero-tolerance policy for nonsense. "Morning, Callista," he said, stepping in with 2 coffees. He paused, his eyes narrowing as he took in my rigid posture and the closed blinds. He set the coffees down and closed the door behind him until it clicked. "Okay, you have your 'I'm about to indict a CEO' face on, but you're not on an active field audit. What's wrong?" I could have deflected. I was used to deflecting. "I'm just tired, Julian. Didn't sleep well." The old Callista would have swallowed the trauma to maintain professionalism, but the old Callista was dead. "I need you to look at a portfolio," I said, my voice eerily calm. "It's highly volatile, deeply unregulated, and currently in the middle of attempting a 6-figure federal bank fraud." Julian pulled up a chair, his demeanor instantly shifting from friendly mentor to lethal auditor. "Show me." I turned my monitor toward him. I didn't give him a tearful preamble. I gave him the facts, delivered with the sterile detachment of a quarterly earnings report. I showed him the $147,000 spreadsheet. I explained the mortgage I had been pressured into co-signing for my parents, Odessa and Corvin. I detailed the $1,900 monthly payments I had made for 3 years. Then I pulled up the credit alert for the pending $100,000 HELOC, and finally I played the 31-second voicemail from my mother kicking me out of the family, timed perfectly with the bank's final approval phase. Julian sat in absolute silence for 5 full minutes. He read every line of the spreadsheet. He checked the timestamps on the email changes. He listened to the voicemail twice. When he finally looked up, his jaw was tight. The anger in his eyes wasn't pity. It was the deep, righteous fury of a man who despises predators. "They think you're an idiot," Julian said quietly. "They think because you've been playing the good, compliant daughter, you're going to just walk away and let them strip the equity out of an asset you legally own. They're banking on your emotional devastation keeping you paralyzed." "They are," I agreed, "and I need to know the exact mechanism they use to bypass me. Because, Julian, You and I both know you can't get a HELOC on a co-owned property without all owners signing the disclosures in front of a notary. I haven't signed a damn thing, so how did it get to the final disbursement phase? Julian leaned back, tapping his pen against his chin. There are only two ways. 1, they forged your signature on the closing documents, and the bank's internal underwriting team is sloppy enough to have missed the discrepancy. 2, they filed a power of attorney. A power of attorney. A POA. The legal document that grants someone else the absolute authority to make financial and legal decisions, including real estate transactions, on your behalf. My blood ran cold. I never granted my mother a power of attorney. Of course you didn't, Julian said grimly. But if they fabricated one and managed to get it stamped by a corrupt or negligent notary public, the bank would accept it at face value. The bank doesn't care about your family drama, Callista. They care about paperwork. If Odessa walked in with a notarized POA claiming you authorized her to handle the refinance and HELOC, the bank would process it. He stood up, pulling his phone from his pocket. You don't need a spreadsheet right now, Callista. You need an executioner. I'm calling Evelyn. Who is Evelyn? Evelyn Sterling, Julian said, already dialing. She's a partner at a boutique real estate and litigation firm downtown. We use her when our corporate clients try to hide assets in offshore shell companies. She is ruthless, she is terrifying, and she does not lose. Get your coat. We're going to see her now. 45 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner office overlooking Rittenhouse Square. The room smelled of expensive leather, old paper, and lemon polish. Behind a massive mahogany desk sat Evelyn Sterling. She was in her late 50s with sharp, hawkish features, piercing dark eyes, and a silver bob that looked like it could cut glass. She didn't offer me a warm smile or a cup of tea. She offered me a notepad and a pen. Julian says your family is attempting to steal $100,000 of your equity via bank fraud, Evelyn said, her voice a low, commanding alto. Walk me through the timeline. Do not leave out a single detail, no matter how small you think it is. I laid out the physical documents on her desk. I walked her through the original deed, the mortgage payments, Brielle's sudden hijacking of the joint account email, the credit alert, and the voicemail. I spoke in clinical, precise terms. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I presented the data. Evelyn watched me intently. I could see her assessing me, deciding if I had the stomach for the war that was about to begin. When I finished, she picked up the credit alert printout. First Guardian National Bank, Evelyn mused. They're a mid-sized lender. Their underwriting is usually decent, which means Julian is right. Your mother didn't just walk in and forge your name on the final loan application. The title company would have flagged an absent co-owner. They used a manufactured power of attorney to bypass your physical presence. Evelyn turned to her computer. I have contacts at First Guardian's title processing department. Since you are the legal co-owner of the property, you have the absolute right to demand all pending documents associated with that address. Give me 10 minutes. She picked up her desk phone, dialed a number, and began speaking in rapid, aggressive legal jargon. She cited my rights under the Truth in Lending Act and demanded an immediate, secure digital fax of the pending HELOC application and all attached addendums for the Coleman property. I sat next to Julian on the leather sofa, my hands folded tightly in my lap. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner of Evelyn's office felt like a sledgehammer hitting my chest. This was the point of no return. Once we pulled these documents, there was no pretending this was just a misunderstanding. This was the moment my family transitioned from toxic relatives to active criminals. The heavy, high-grade printer in the corner of Evelyn's office hummed to life. Page after page slid into the tray. Evelyn collected the stack, adjusted her reading glasses, and began flipping through them. The room was deathly quiet. Standard HELOC application, Evelyn narrated as she flipped. Requested amount, $100,000. Primary borrower listed as Odessa Coleman. Secondary borrower, Callista Coleman. Oh, here we go. She stopped on a thick, legal-sized page. She slid it across the mahogany desk toward me. Take a look at that, Callista. I leaned forward. It was a specific power of attorney for real estate transactions. The document legally granted Odessa Coleman the full, unrestricted right to act as my agent regarding the property, including the right to borrow against it, encumber it, or sell it. At the bottom of the page was a signature line, Callista Coleman. I stared at it. It was a forgery, but it was a damn good one. Whoever had done it had spent hours practicing. They had captured the slight leftward slant of my K and the specific hurried loop I always made on the L. It wasn't Odessa's handwriting. Odessa's writing was looping, overly dramatic, and heavy-handed. This forgery was light, meticulous, and careful. It looked exactly like the handwriting of an art major. It looked exactly like Brielle's handwriting. "It's a fake," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I have never seen this document in my life, but the signature is incredibly close. I think my sister Brielle forged it." Evelyn nodded, not looking surprised. A good forgery can fool a busy loan officer. But a loan officer doesn't verify identity. A notary does. Look at the bottom right corner. Look at the notary seal. I shifted my gaze to the blue ink stamp pressed onto the paper, validating the forged signature. The stamp proved that a state licensed official had supposedly verified my physical ID and witnessed me sign this document in person. I read the name on the notary seal. Silas Vance, Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Commission expires 2028. The breath rushed out of my lungs like I had been punched in the stomach. I knew that name. I knew exactly who Silas Vance was. "Do you recognize the notary?" Julian asked, watching my face turn pale. "Yes," I said, my voice suddenly venomous. "Silas Vance. He's Brielle's ex-boyfriend." The puzzle pieces violently snapped together, forming a picture so ugly, so deeply calculated that it momentarily stunned me. Silas was a guy Brielle had dated 2 years ago. He was a struggling entrepreneur who sold bad real estate advice online. He was chronically broke, desperate to look wealthy, and hopelessly obsessed with Brielle. When they broke up, Brielle used to brag to me about how Silas would still do anything she asked, like a trained dog hoping for a scrap of attention. He had gotten his notary license hoping to become a closing agent for title companies, but he mostly just notarized auto titles for a used car lot. Odessa hadn't orchestrated the mechanics of this fraud. Odessa was too technologically inept and too arrogant to get her hands dirty with the actual paperwork. Odessa was just the greedy beneficiary. This was Brielle. Brielle, the fragile younger sister. Brielle, who claimed she couldn't handle the stress of a real job. Brielle had meticulously forged my signature, called up her desperate ex-boyfriend Silas, and batted her eyelashes until he agreed to illegally stamp and log the forged power of attorney in his official state registry. They had conspired. They had built a criminal bridge to walk over my back and steal $100,000. "He's her ex-boyfriend," I repeated, looking up at Evelyn. "He's broke. She manipulated him into stamping a forged document to bypass the bank's security protocols." Evelyn Sterling leaned back in her chair, a slow, terrifying, predatory smile spreading across her face. It was the smile of a shark that had just smelled a drop of blood in the water from a mile away. "Well," Evelyn said softly, "that changes everything." "How?" Julian asked. "Because," Evelyn explained, tapping a manicured fingernail against the fraudulent document, "if your mother simply forged this alone, she could play the victim. She could cry to a judge that she didn't understand the paperwork, that she thought she had implied permission, that it was a desperate mistake by a mother trying to save her home. Judges in family disputes sometimes get soft. They order restitution and a slap on the wrist." Evelyn leaned forward, planting her hands on the desk. "But this? This involves a third-party co-conspirator. This involves a state-licensed official breaking his oath for personal ties. This is premeditated, coordinated, multi-party fraud. It is a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud, and suddenly, your 23-year-old sister is no longer a spoiled sibling. She is the architect of a felony." I stared at the blue notary stamp. I thought about all the times Odessa had told me I needed to be kinder to Brielle. I thought about the $10,800 I had paid for Brielle's SUV while she plotted to steal my equity. I thought about the 31-second voicemail, timed so perfectly by Odessa, entirely confident that Brielle's illegal handiwork had secured their future. "Callista," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the noise in my head. "The bank has approved the loan based on this document. The rescission period, the cooling off period where a borrower can back out, ends on Friday at midnight. If we don't act, that $100,000 will be wired into an account controlled by your mother on Monday morning, and once the money is gone, recovering it is a nightmare." She picked up her pen. "I need to know what you want to do. We can call the bank right now, freeze the transaction, and handle this quietly. Your family gets a terrifying wake-up call, but no one goes to jail. You walk away." She paused, her dark eyes locking onto mine. Or we can build a guillotine. We can freeze the assets, report the notary fraud to the state licensing board, file a police report for identity theft, and completely sever your financial liability from that house. It will leave them with nothing. It will likely cost them the property. Which path do you want? I looked at Julian. He didn't say a word. He just nodded, trusting my judgment. The risk analyst in me calculated the variables. If I let them off quietly, they would never stop. Odessa would spin the narrative to the extended family, painting me as the villain who tried to sabotage them out of petty jealousy. Brielle would learn that she could commit federal crimes and face zero consequences, so long as she targeted family. If a structure is built on a toxic foundation, you don't patch the drywall. You detonate the base and let it fall. I looked back at Evelyn Sterling. I felt my spine straighten. The last remaining shred of the desperate daughter seeking her mother's love quietly withered up and died, replaced by something much harder, much colder, and utterly unbreakable. Build the guillotine, Evelyn, I said, my voice steady and clear. I want the loan frozen immediately. I want the fraud reported, and I want to set a trap. Evelyn's smile widened. I like you, Callista. What kind of trap? My mother left me a voicemail saying the family was moving on without me, I said, pointing to the documents. They think they are safe. I don't want to just send a lawyer's letter. I want to watch their faces when they realize the money isn't coming. I want them in a room, forced to look at the paperwork, forced to realize that the daughter they thought was a disposable ATM is the one holding the match to their house. A confrontation, Evelyn mused. High risk, very emotional. Lawyers usually advise against it. I'm not going to be emotional, I promised. I'm going to be an auditor delivering a final damage report. Can you arrange a meeting here, in your office? I can, Evelyn said, already pulling out a fresh legal pad. I will send a formal demand letter to your mother by courier tomorrow morning. I won't mention the fraud yet. I will simply state that as the co-owner of the property, you require a formal mediation meeting regarding the pending HELOC before Friday's disbursement deadline. If she refuses to attend, I will inform her that I will immediately file an injunction with the bank. She won't refuse, I said, knowing Odessa's psychology perfectly. She'll be furious, but she'll come. She'll think she can intimidate me in person. She'll think she can yell at me until I back down, just like she has my entire life. She's in for a very rude awakening then, Julian muttered. There's one more thing, I said, remembering the final piece of the financial web holding my family together. My grandparents, Corvin's parents, Alphonse and Yolanda Coleman. Evelyn poised her pen. What about them? They passed away a few years ago, I explained. My grandmother, Yolanda, was the only person in that house who ever saw through Odessa's act. Before she died, she set up a family trust fund. It has exactly $92,000 in it. It was designated strictly for family educational or critical medical emergencies. Who is the trustee? Evelyn asked sharply. Who controls the disbursements? I do, I said. My grandmother specifically bypassed my father and my mother. She named me the sole legal trustee. She knew I was the only one who wouldn't blow it on luxury cars or vacations. And let me guess, Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming. Brielle has been trying to get her hands on it. For years, I confirmed. She claims she needs it to fund her influencer business. I've always said no, legally adhering to the trust's educational and medical stipulations. But now, with them changing my banking emails and forging my signature, I want that trust locked down so tight that Brielle couldn't get a dime out of it if she showed up with a SWAT team. Done, Evelyn said. I'll draft the paperwork to freeze all disbursements and transfer the administrative management of the trust to a neutral third-party fiduciary firm. You'll still be the trustee, but the funds will be placed behind a corporate firewall. It will require a mountain of legal verification to release a single dollar. I stood up. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried into the office that morning hadn't vanished, but it had transformed. It was no longer the weight of victimhood. It was the weight of ammunition. Thank you, Evelyn, I said. Don't thank me yet, she replied, standing to shake my hand. The easy part is finding the fraud. The hard part is sitting across a conference table from the people who raised you, looking them in the eye and pulling the trigger. Are you sure you're ready for that? I thought about the $147,000. I thought about Corvin staring at his shoes while Odessa degraded me. I thought about Brielle driving a car I paid for while plotting with her ex-boyfriend to steal my home. I've been ready since I was a little girl, I said. I just finally have the paperwork to prove it. I walked out of the law office and stepped back onto the streets of Philadelphia. The gray sky hadn't broken, and the wind was just as bitter, but I didn't feel the cold anymore. The Coleman family had wanted to move on without me. They had wanted to erase the invisible pillar that held up their entire world. In 3 days, they were going to find out exactly what happens when the pillar decides to walk away. While I was sitting in Evelyn Sterling's mahogany-paneled office arming a legal warhead 20 miles away in the affluent, manicured suburbs of Pennsylvania, my family was celebrating their perceived victory. To understand the sheer magnitude of their delusion, you have to look past the pristine brick facade of the 4-bedroom colonial house I was paying for and peer into the psychological rot of the people living inside it. It was Wednesday evening, roughly 24 hours after Odessa had left the voicemail exiling me from the family. In the Coleman household, the atmosphere was one of triumphant, breathless anticipation. Odessa was holding court in the gourmet kitchen, a kitchen she had insisted required imported Italian marble countertops, financed, of course, on a credit card she could barely make the minimum payments on. She stood at the island, pouring herself a glass of expensive Cabernet, the embodiment of a woman who believed she had just outsmarted the world. Odessa Coleman lived her entire life for an audience. Her reality was constructed entirely of how she was perceived by the neighborhood wives, the country club peripheral members, and her church social committee. She needed them to believe she was wealthy, cultured, and effortlessly successful. But maintaining the illusion of intergenerational wealth on a middle-class, severely mismanaged income is a full-time job of lies. For years, I had been her silent, unwilling sponsor. But recently, my $1,900 a month wasn't cutting it anymore. Odessa's secret credit card debts, the ones she kept hidden even from Corvin, had ballooned into a terrifying, unmanageable monster. She had nearly $80,000 in high-interest revolving debt, accumulated from designer clothes, luxury home decor, and expensive vacations designed specifically to be photographed. The minimum payments were drowning her. The $100,000 home equity line of credit was her desperate, illegal lifeboat. She truly believed that by Friday, the bank would wire the funds into her account. She would pay off her secret debts, maintain her flawless image, and she wouldn't have to answer to her eldest daughter ever again. In her mind, kicking me out before the money arrived was a stroke of genius. It was a preemptive strike to ensure I wouldn't be around to ask questions when the mortgage statements suddenly showed a massive new lien against the property. Sitting across from her at the kitchen island was Brielle. But Brielle wasn't drinking wine. She was staring at her iPhone, the screen reflecting in her wide, anxious eyes. If Odessa was driven by neighborhood vanity, Brielle was driven by the crushing, unrelenting pressure of the internet. Brielle's entire luxury influencer persona was a house of cards rapidly catching fire. Behind her curated grid of aesthetic vacation photos and designer unboxings, Brielle was drowning in her own modern financial nightmare. She had maxed out 2 American Express cards, she owed thousands to buy now, pay later apps, and she had recently promised an event planner a $15,000 deposit for a networking gala she was supposed to host to boost her follower count. She didn't have a dime of it. Brielle had initially tried to guilt-trip me into unlocking our grandmother Yolanda's $92,000 trust fund to pay for the gala, calling it an educational business expense. When I flatly refused, citing the strict legal parameters of the trust, Brielle had panicked. The HELOC was her only way out. Odessa had promised her $30,000 from the loan proceeds to invest in her brand, but the anxiety radiating from Brielle that Wednesday night was palpable. She rapidly typed a text message under the table, her perfectly manicured thumbnails clicking against the screen. She was texting Silas Vance, the ex-boyfriend, the corrupt notary public. "Did anyone from the title company call you today?" she typed. A minute later, Silas replied, "No, stop texting me about this. If your sister finds out I stamped a POA she didn't sign, I lose my license and go to jail, Brie. You promised she wouldn't check the mail." Brielle rolled her eyes, typing back furiously. "She won't. Mom kicked her out. She's completely cut off. Just chill out. We're fine." "Put the phone away, Brielle," Odessa commanded, taking a sip of her wine. "You need to start looking at interior decorators. Once the funds clear on Friday, I want to completely redo the sunroom. The Martins down the street just put in a conservatory. We cannot look like we're falling behind." "I know, Mom," Brielle said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's going to be perfect. Everything is finally going to be perfect." Standing in the shadows of the hallway, listening to this exchange, was Corvin Coleman, my father. Corvin looked at his wife and his youngest daughter, his stomach churning with a sickening, toxic mixture of dread and cowardice. Corvin was a man who had spent his 55 years on Earth avoiding conflict at all costs. He was a middle management employee who kept his head down, agreed with his boss, and came home to agree with his wife. He knew about the HELOC. Odessa had told him she was handling the paperwork to consolidate their debts. But Corvin wasn't completely stupid. He knew I would never, under any circumstances, agree to leverage the equity in the house for Odessa to buy new furniture and pay off Brielle's credit cards. He knew I had to have signed a document, and he knew I hadn't been home to sign one. When Silas Vance had nervously shown up at the house on Sunday afternoon to stamp the forged power of attorney in the living room, Corvin had conveniently gone to the hardware store. He had manufactured an alibi for himself, stepping out of the house so he wouldn't have to witness the felony taking place in his own living room. He knew exactly what was happening, and he chose to go look at drill bits rather than protect his oldest daughter from a massive financial crime. "Corvin!" Odessa's voice snapped like a whip from the kitchen. "Stop lurking in the hallway. Come have a glass of wine. We have things to celebrate." Corvin stepped into the light. He looked exhausted, the bags under his eyes dark and heavy. "I'm just tired, Odessa. I think I'm going to head to bed." Odessa scoffed, waving her hand dismissively. "Suit yourself. You always ruin the mood anyway." Corvin turned and walked up the carpeted stairs. He walked past the master suite, past Brielle's sprawling bedroom filled with lighting equipment and shopping bags, and paused in front of the closed door of the den. He opened it slightly. Inside was the pull-out couch I slept on during the holidays. It was empty, sterile, and cold. Corvin closed his eyes, the crushing weight of his own profound weakness pressing down on his chest. He pulled his phone out of his pocket, staring at my name in his contacts. But he didn't press call. He just put the phone away, closed the door to the den, and walked away. Silence was his sanctuary, even if it meant burying his daughter alive. Thursday morning arrived in Philadelphia with a bitter, biting frost that coated the windows of my office. I was sitting at my desk, a hot cup of black coffee steaming next to my keyboard. The emotional shock of Tuesday night had completely calcified. I wasn't grieving anymore. I was executing a sequence. At exactly 10 a.m., my desk phone rang. It was Evelyn Sterling. "Good morning, Callista." Evelyn's crisp, authoritative voice came through the speaker. "I have updates. The guillotine is officially assembled." I leaned back in my chair. "Talk to me." "I spent the morning on the phone with the senior fraud investigator at First Guardian National Bank," Evelyn said. "I bypassed the standard customer service lines and went straight to their internal risk department. I submitted the affidavit stating that you did not sign the power of attorney, and I provided them with 3 separate notarized examples of your actual signature from the original mortgage documents to compare against Brielle's forgery." What was their reaction? "Panic," Evelyn said, and I could hear the grim satisfaction in her voice. Banks do not like the word forgery, especially when it involves a state notarized document. First Guardian has immediately frozen the HELOC application. The $100,000 disbursement scheduled for tomorrow has been indefinitely suspended pending a full federal fraud investigation. Your mother is not getting a single dime from that equity. A sharp electric thrill of victory shot through my veins. The lifeboat had been sunk. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, "I have officially filed the paperwork to transfer the Alphonse and Yolanda Coleman Trust. As of 9 a.m. this morning, the $92,000 is under the administrative control of Vanguard Fiduciary Services. You remain the legal trustee, but you no longer hold the physical keys to the vault. If Brielle tries to call the bank crying about needing money for an emergency, she's going to hit an automated corporate firewall that requires 50 pages of documentation and my personal approval. The trust is impenetrable." "Thank you, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady. "Don't thank me yet. We have the meeting tomorrow," she reminded me. "I sent the demand letter via priority courier this morning. It requires a signature upon delivery. Odessa will have it in her hands by noon today. It formally summons her, Corvin, and Brielle to my office tomorrow at 2 p.m. for a mandatory mediation regarding the property deed. It does not mention the fraud. It simply states that as co-owner, you are halting all financial cooperation until a meeting takes place." "She's going to explode," I said, glancing at my muted cell phone, anticipating the barrage of enraged text messages. "Let her," Evelyn said coldly. "Explosive people make mistakes. We'll see you tomorrow at 1:30 p.m. Callista. Wear something intimidating." The line clicked dead. I set the receiver down. The heavy artillery had been fired. Now it was time for the close quarters combat. I opened my laptop and logged into my personal banking portal. This was the ritual I had been waiting for. This was the moment I stopped the bleeding. For 6 years, I had watched my hard-earned money drain out of this account on the first of every month like clockwork. I clicked on the Scheduled Transfers and Autopay tab. There it was. First Guardian Mortgage, $1,900. Status, scheduled for the 1st of next month. I moved the cursor over the Edit/Cancel button. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I thought about the 31-second voicemail. This family is moving on without you. Okay, I thought. Move on. I clicked Cancel. A prompt appeared. Are you sure you want to permanently cancel this recurring payment? Yes. The line vanished from the screen. Just like that, $1,900 a month returned to my future. Next, Toyota Financial Services, Brielle's lease, $450. Cancel. Yes. Next, Blue Cross Premium, Corvin and Odessa, $640. Cancel. Yes. In less than 3 minutes, I had severed the financial umbilical cord. Nearly $3,000 a month of my income was finally mine again. The visceral, intoxicating feeling of keeping my own money washed over me. I felt lighter. I felt like I had just dropped a 100-pound rucksack that I had been carrying up a mountain since I was 21 years old. I closed the banking portal and opened my personal email to clean out my inbox. I needed everything organized for the confrontation tomorrow. I started deleting spam, archiving work emails, and sorting documents into Evelyn's legal folder. As I was clearing out my digital clutter, I logged into my cellular carrier's web portal to download my monthly call logs for a business expense report. Because I am a data analyst, I don't just look at my phone screen. I look at the raw, itemized data logs provided by the telecom company. I scrolled down to the dates matching Tuesday, the day the HELOC was approved, and the day Odessa left her voicemail. My eyes caught an anomaly. Tuesday, 1:12 a.m., incoming call, Corvin Coleman. Duration, 0:45 seconds. Status, voicemail left. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. My father had called me at 1:12 in the morning on Tuesday. That was almost 20 hours before Odessa's 9:47 p.m. voicemail. I checked my iPhone. There was no missed call notification from Corvin. There was no red dot on my voicemail app. I realized what had happened. Months ago, after Corvin had called me 3 times in one night to beg me to pay for an emergency veterinary bill for Odessa's purebred dog, I had temporarily put his number on hide alerts and routed him directly to voicemail to get some sleep. The setting had never been turned off. He had called, it had gone straight to the carrier server, and my phone hadn't notified me. My heart began to beat a strange, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I picked up my phone, bypassed the visual voicemail app, and manually dialed into the carrier's back-end voicemail system. I punched in my PIN. You have 1 saved message, the automated voice chirped. Message received, Tuesday at 1:12 a.m. I pressed 1 to listen. The audio was staticky. I could hear the faint ambient sound of wind, like the caller was standing outside on a porch or a driveway. Then I heard the heavy, labored breathing of my father. There was a long pause, filled only with the sound of his exhalations. Then Corvin's voice, hushed and trembling, came through the speaker. Callista, it's Dad. He stopped. I could hear him swallow hard. Are you checking your mail lately? The physical mail, I mean. You need to check your mail from the bank. First Guardian. Just look closely at the paperwork. Your mother and Brielle, they're doing something with the house. Another agonizingly long pause. I gripped the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. I tried to tell them no, Corvin whispered, his voice cracking with a pathetic, hollow kind of grief. I told them it was wrong, but I can't stop them, Callista. Your mother, you know how she gets. I can't stop her. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Please don't hate me. A faint click sounded in the background, like a door opening. Corvin, who are you talking to out there? It was Odessa's voice, muffled but distinct in the background. No one, honey, just checking the locks, Corvin replied, his voice instantly shifting from a grieving father to an obedient, terrified servant. The phone beeped. The message ended. I sat frozen at my desk. The hot coffee beside me had gone completely cold. If there had been any lingering, microscopic shred of sympathy left in my heart for my father, that 45-second audio file violently extinguished it. Corvin wasn't just blindly ignorant. He wasn't a tragic victim of Odessa's manipulation who had simply been kept in the dark about the finances. He knew. He was fully, entirely aware of the felony. He knew his wife and his youngest daughter were forging my signature to steal $100,000 of my equity. He had watched them do it. And instead of acting like a father, instead of walking into the living room, tearing up the fraudulent paperwork, kicking Silas Vance out of the house, and protecting his eldest daughter from financial ruin, he had gone outside in the middle of the night to leave a cryptic, cowardly whisper on a voicemail he probably hoped I would never check. He wanted to assuage his own guilt without actually having to endure the discomfort of standing up to his wife. He wanted to be able to tell himself, well, I tried to warn her while simultaneously allowing me to be led to the slaughter. It was the ultimate unforgivable betrayal of an enabler. It is one thing to be stabbed in the chest by an enemy looking you in the eye. It is an entirely different, vastly more painful trauma to watch the person who is supposed to protect you hand them the knife, look away, and whisper an apology to the wall. I didn't cry. The capacity for tears had been burned out of me. I carefully exported the audio file from the carrier system. I saved it to my encrypted hard drive. I saved a copy to a USB flash drive. I labeled the file, Corvin_confession_Tuesday, 1 a.m.wave. My mother had provided the motive. Brielle had provided the forgery. But Corvin had just provided the undeniable, irrefutable proof of a coordinated conspiracy. I picked up my phone and sent a text to Julian Reed. I found a voicemail from my father. He knew about the fraud beforehand and admitted he couldn't stop them. The conspiracy is confirmed. Julian's reply came 30 seconds later. Bring the audio file tomorrow. We are going to bury them. At 12:15 p.m. that same Thursday, a FedEx Priority courier pulled up to the pristine driveway of the Coleman Colonial House. Odessa opened the door, wearing a silk robe, expecting a package containing the new Egyptian cotton sheets she had ordered on credit the night before. Instead, the courier handed her a rigid, legal-sized envelope with the embossed logo of Sterling and Associates litigation firm. "Signature required, ma'am," the courier said, holding out an electronic pad. Odessa frowned, a flicker of irritation crossing her perfectly preserved face. She scrawled her name on the pad, took the envelope, and closed the door. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a silver letter opener, and sliced the heavy paper open. She pulled out the crisp, watermarked legal stationery. Dear Mrs. Odessa Coleman, this firm has been retained by Ms. Callista Coleman regarding her legal and financial interests in the property located at address. As a registered co-owner of the deed, Miss Coleman holds equal legal authority over all encumbrances, liens, and financial restructuring tied to this property. Effective immediately, Ms. Coleman is halting all voluntary financial contributions to the household, including but not limited to the mortgage auto draft, vehicle lease payments, and insurance premiums, until a formal mediation can be conducted. You, Corvin Coleman, and Brielle Coleman are hereby required to attend a mediation meeting at our offices tomorrow, Friday at 2 p.m., to discuss the pending financial status of the property. Failure to appear will result in immediate injunctive action. Sincerely, Evelyn Sterling, Esquire. Odessa stared at the letter. Her brain, wired for control and dominance, simply could not process the words on the page. Callista? Retaining a high-powered litigation firm? Halting the payments? It didn't make sense. Callista was supposed to be weeping in her apartment, begging to be let back into the family group chat. Callista was supposed to be the obedient workhorse who took her punishment and kept writing the checks. Panic, cold and sharp, finally pierced through Odessa's delusion. If Callista halted the mortgage payment, the bank would issue a notice. If the bank issued a notice, it could flag the HELOC underwriting team. Brielle! Odessa shrieked, her voice echoing through the massive, empty house, entirely devoid of its usual refined composure. Brielle, get down here right now! Upstairs, Brielle dropped her makeup brush. She ran down the stairs, her heart pounding against her ribs. What? Mom, what's wrong? Odessa shoved the legal letter into Brielle's hands. Her hands were shaking. Your sister, she got a lawyer. She's stopping the payments. Brielle read the letter, all the color draining from her face, leaving her looking sickly and small. Mom, the HELOC. The money is supposed to drop tomorrow. If Callista's lawyer contacts the bank before tomorrow. She won't, Odessa snapped, her eyes wide with a feral, desperate kind of rage. She's just throwing a tantrum. She's bluffing. She wants attention because I told her she was out. We are going to this meeting tomorrow. We are going to sit her down, and I am going to put the fear of God into her. She is not going to ruin this for us." Odessa snatched her phone off the counter and dialed Corvin's number at his office. "Corvin," Odessa hissed when he answered, "cancel whatever pathetic meetings you have tomorrow afternoon. We have a problem with Callista." On the other end of the line, sitting in his gray cubicle, Corvin closed his eyes. He heard the barely suppressed panic in his wife's voice, and he knew, with a terrifying absolute certainty, that the ghost he had whispered to in the dark had finally woken up. The invisible pillar wasn't just walking away. It was preparing to collapse the roof directly onto their heads. Friday was coming, and hell was coming with it. Friday arrived with a kind of sharp, cloudless blue sky that makes the cold feel even more severe. At 1:30 p.m., I walked into the lobby of Sterling & Associates. I was wearing a tailored navy blue suit, my posture rigidly straight. I didn't feel like a daughter walking into a family dispute. I felt like an auditor walking into a hostile boardroom to deliver a fatal bankruptcy report. Julian Reed was already there, sitting in the waiting area. He stood up when I walked in, holding a sleek black folder containing the duplicate copies of our evidence. He didn't offer any platitudes like, "It's going to be okay," or "Be strong." He just handed me the folder and gave me a single, approving nod. "The paperwork is flawless," Julian said quietly. "Evelyn is waiting in the main conference room." I walked down the hallway, the sound of my heels clicking rhythmically against the hardwood floor. The main conference room was a masterpiece of corporate intimidation. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls overlooking the Philadelphia skyline, a massive, gleaming mahogany table, and high-backed black leather chairs. At the head of the table sat Evelyn Sterling, her laptop open, her reading glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. "Sit next to me, Callista," Evelyn commanded without looking up. "Julian, you can take the corner seat. You're here as an expert financial witness regarding the spreadsheet." I took my seat. I placed my folder on the table, aligning the edges perfectly parallel to the wood grain. Inside were 5 tabs. Tab 1, the $147,000 spreadsheet. Tab 2, the forged power of attorney beside my authentic mortgage signature. Tab 3, the bank's fraud alert and HELOC suspension notice. Tab 4, the Vanguard Trust lockdown confirmation. Tab 5, a USB drive containing 2 audio files. One was the voicemail from my father. The other was a recorded phone call from 2 months ago, a conversation where Brielle had casually tried to manipulate me into signing over my equity, complaining that my name on the deed was ruining her credit opportunities. My phone app had loudly announced, "This call is being recorded," at the start of the conversation, a feature I used for my consulting work. Brielle, too self-absorbed to notice or care, had spoken freely. At exactly 1:58 p.m., the heavy glass doors of the suite swung open. My family had arrived. Odessa Coleman walked in first. She was dressed for a country club luncheon, wearing a beige cashmere coat, pearls, and an expression of profound, insulted arrogance. She held her designer handbag tightly against her side like a shield. She looked at me for a fraction of a second, her eyes narrowing in pure venom before looking away and taking a seat at the far end of the table. Behind her was Brielle. My sister had clearly dressed to play the role of the innocent victim. She wore a soft pink cardigan and minimal makeup, her eyes wide and nervously darting around the imposing room. She pulled her chair uncomfortably close to Odessa's, projecting the image of a frightened child. Then came Corvin. My father wore a gray suit that looked slightly too large for him. His shoulders were slumped, his gaze fixed firmly on the carpet. He looked like a man walking to his own execution. He didn't look at me at all. He sat down next to Odessa, folding his hands tightly in his lap. Finally, a man in a rumpled brown suit walked in, carrying a battered leather briefcase. He had the slightly harassed look of a suburban family lawyer who usually handled simple divorces and property line disputes. "Good afternoon," the man said, clearing his throat. "I am Arthur Pendleton, representing Mr. and Mrs. Coleman." Evelyn Sterling looked at him over the rim of her glasses. It was the look a lioness gives a gazelle that has accidentally wandered into her den. "Have a seat, Mr. Pendleton. I am Evelyn Sterling, representing Ms. Callista Coleman." Pendleton sat down, pulling out a legal pad. Odessa leaned toward him, whispering something furiously in his ear. Pendleton nodded, trying to maintain a professional facade. "Before we begin," Evelyn said, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel, instantly silencing Odessa's whispering, "let me establish the parameters of this mediation. This is not a family therapy session. We are not here to discuss hurt feelings, childhood grievances, or emotional dynamics. We are here to discuss a severe, undocumented financial liability involving a jointly owned asset. There will be no shouting. There will be no interruptions. Every claim made in this room must be backed by paper. If anyone raises their voice, the meeting concludes and we move directly to litigation. Is that understood? Arthur Pendleton nodded quickly. Understood, Miss Sterling. Odessa scoffed, crossing her arms. This is ridiculous. Callista, stop this nonsense right now. I don't know what kind of tantrum this is, but you are embarrassing yourself. Evelyn didn't even blink. Mr. Pendleton, control your client or I will ask you to leave. Pendleton touched Odessa's arm. Odessa, please, let them present. Evelyn turned to me. Callista, you have the floor. I opened my folder. My hands were completely steady. I looked across the table, making direct eye contact with my mother for the first time since she had left that voicemail. I will begin with a number, I said, my voice eerily calm, echoing in the quiet room. I pulled out 5 copies of the spreadsheet and slid them across the polished mahogany. 1 to Pendleton, 1 to Odessa, 1 to Corvin, 1 to Brielle. $147,000, I stated. The room fell dead silent. Odessa stared at the paper, her eyes scanning the itemized list. That, I continued, is the exact documented numerical value of what I have contributed to this family over the past 6 years. $68,000 in mortgage payments for the house currently occupied by Odessa and Corvin. $19,000 for health insurance premiums. $10,800 for the lease on Brielle's vehicle. Every emergency, every repair, every missed tax payment. Every single dollar is logged, dated, and matched with a bank transfer receipt. I paused, letting the weight of the number suffocate the room. I paid this, I said quietly, not because there was a legal contract requiring me to do so, but because I was operating under the assumption that we were a family. On Tuesday night, at 9:47 p.m., Odessa left me a 31-second voicemail informing me that I was out of the family and that you were moving on without me. Odessa opened her mouth, her face flushing a deep, angry red. Because you were being disrespectful and distant. You think you can just buy us and then act like you're better. I was acting like an underwriter, I interrupted smoothly, my tone never rising. And since I am no longer part of the family, I am no longer financing it. As of yesterday morning, all auto drafts have been canceled. I will not make another mortgage payment. I will not pay the insurance. I will not pay for Brielle's car. Brielle let out a sharp gasp. Callista, you can't do that. They'll repossess my car. Then you should contact the dealership and negotiate a payment plan, Brielle. It is no longer my liability. Arthur Pendleton cleared his throat, holding up a hand. Ms. Coleman, Callista. While I understand you are upset about a family disagreement, you are a legal co-signer on the mortgage. If you stop paying, the loan will default. That will destroy your own credit score as well as my client's. Surely, as a financial professional, you don't want to engage in a mutually assured destruction over a voicemail. I looked at Pendleton. He genuinely didn't know. Odessa hadn't told her own lawyer about the HELOC. She had let him walk into a minefield blindfolded. Mr. Pendleton, I said softly, I am not concerned about my credit score, because my credit score is currently the subject of an active federal bank fraud investigation. Pendleton froze. The pen in his hand stopped mid-sentence. Excuse me? I turned to tab 2. I pulled out the crisp white copies of the specific power of attorney. I slid one directly to Pendleton and one to the center of the table for my family. On Sunday, I said, the primary contact email on our joint household checking account was altered by Brielle. On Tuesday afternoon, First Guardian National Bank approved a home equity line of credit for $100,000 against the property I co-own. The primary borrower is Odessa. I received an automated credit inquiry alert regarding this loan. I tapped the paper in front of Pendleton. In order to secure that loan without my physical presence, a specific power of attorney was submitted to the bank's title department. Look at the signature at the bottom, Mr. Pendleton. Pendleton adjusted his glasses, his face draining of color as he read the document. I did not sign that document, I stated, my voice echoing like a gavel striking wood. I did not authorize it. I was never in the presence of the notary public whose stamp is on that page. That signature is a forgery, and the notary public, Silas Vance, happens to be Brielle Coleman's ex-boyfriend. The atmosphere in the room violently shattered. Corvin squeezed his eyes shut, his hands trembling. Odessa stared at the paper, her mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. She looked at Brielle, then at Pendleton, her mask of superiority completely melting into sheer, unadulterated terror. "Are you," Pendleton stammered, his professional demeanor evaporating, "are you alleging that my clients forged a notarized legal document to secure a 6-figure loan?" "I am not alleging anything, Arthur," Evelyn Sterling interjected, her voice deadly. "We are stating it as a matter of empirical fact. We have already submitted an affidavit of forgery to the fraud division at First Guardian National Bank. The HELOC disbursement has been permanently frozen. The money is not coming." Odessa let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. No, the bank said Friday. The bank caught you," I corrected her coldly. Brielle suddenly shoved her chair back. The innocent victim act vanished, replaced by the frantic, cornered panic of a narcissist caught in a lie. "You're lying," she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at me. "You're making this up to ruin us. Mom, she's twisting everything. I didn't forge anything. Silas wouldn't do that. She's just trying to steal the house because she's a jealous, controlling—" "Brielle," I said. Just her name, flat, devoid of emotion. It cut through her, screaming like a blade. I reached into my folder and pulled out the USB drive. I plugged it into Evelyn's laptop, which was connected to the premium speakers in the center of the conference table. "Every claim requires paper, or in this case, a time-stamped digital equivalent," I said, looking directly at Arthur Pendleton. "Mr. Pendleton, my firm requires me to use a call recording software for compliance purposes. It announces itself with a loud, automated warning at the start of every call. My sister ignores it." I clicked the mouse. Brielle's voice, recorded 2 months prior, filled the mahogany room. It sounded warm, casual, and incredibly entitled. "I just don't get why you're being so stubborn about the house, Callista. I just need you off the deed and off Grandma's trust. It would be so much easier if you just gave me the equity. Silas said it's super easy to file the paperwork. You wouldn't even have to do anything. Just let us have it. You make enough money anyway." The recording clicked off. Brielle looked like she was going to vomit. She shrank back into her chair, her eyes wide with horror. "That establishes motive and premeditation," Evelyn noted dryly, writing on her notepad. "But that's not the worst part," I continued, my eyes shifting slowly from Brielle to the man sitting silently beside my mother. "Dad," I said. Corvin flinched as if he had been physically struck. He still wouldn't look up. He stared at his trembling hands, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "You knew," I said. The anger finally leaked into my voice, dark and heavy. "You knew they were doing it. You watched Silas Vance walk into the house with his notary stamp. You knew your wife and your youngest daughter were committing a felony to steal my equity." "No!" Odessa snapped, trying to regain control, trying to protect the illusion. "Corvin didn't know anything. This is insane. Arthur, do something." I clicked the mouse a second time. The staticky, wind-blown audio of Corvin's 1:12 a.m. voicemail filled the room. "Callista, it's Dad. Are you checking your mail lately? Your mother and Brielle, they're doing something with the house. I tried to tell them no. I told them it was wrong, but I can't stop them, Callista. Your mother, you know how she gets. I can't stop her. I'm sorry." The audio ended. The silence that followed was absolute. It was the silence of a structure that had been completely, systematically demolished. There was nowhere left for them to hide, no lies left to tell, no gaslighting that could erase the sound of Corvin's own voice admitting to the conspiracy. Arthur Pendleton slowly closed his legal pad. He capped his pen. His hands were shaking slightly. He looked at Odessa, his expression a mixture of profound disgust and professional terror. "Mrs. Coleman," Pendleton said, his voice completely devoid of its previous warmth. "When you retained my services, I specifically asked you if there were any encumbrances, ongoing disputes, or liabilities regarding this property. You assured me this was a simple family mediation regarding a delinquent mortgage payment." "Arthur, she's manipulating the recordings," Odessa pleaded, a desperate, hysterical edge to her voice. "She's trying to destroy her own family." "You committed bank fraud," Pendleton stated, leaning away from her as if she were radioactive. "You conspired to commit federal wire fraud, identity theft, and you suborned a state-licensed notary public. And then you brought me into this room to negotiate on your behalf without disclosing that you were the subject of an active criminal investigation." Pendleton stood up. He snapped his briefcase shut with a loud final click. "As an officer of the court, I am ethically prohibited from representing clients who are actively engaged in ongoing fraudulent activities," Pendleton said stiffly. I am withdrawing as your counsel, effective immediately. Do not call my office. A formal notice of withdrawal will be mailed to your residence." "You can't leave," Brielle cried out, tears finally spilling over her cheeks. Real tears this time, born of actual consequences. "You're our lawyer." "Not anymore," Pendleton said. He looked at Evelyn Sterling. "Ms. Sterling, Ms. Coleman, I apologize for taking up your time. I had absolutely no knowledge of the forgery." "We know, Arthur," Evelyn said smoothly. "Have a good afternoon." Pendleton walked out of the glass doors without looking back, and then there were only 5 of us left in the room. The Coleman family, stripped of their legal shield, stripped of their illusions, sitting in the wreckage of their own greed. Odessa looked at the empty chair where her lawyer had just been sitting. For the first time in my entire life, the invincible, terrifying Odessa Coleman looked small. She looked old. She looked exactly like what she was, a desperate, drowning woman who had just sunk her own lifeboat. "Callista," Corvin whispered, finally lifting his head. His eyes were red, filled with a pathetic, hollow sorrow. "Callista, please, if the bank investigates, Brielle could go to prison. Your mother could go to prison." I looked at the man who had stood in the dark and whispered an apology to the wind rather than defend me. "I am aware of the federal sentencing guidelines for bank fraud, Corvin," I said clinically. "You wouldn't do that," Odessa rasped, her voice trembling. "You wouldn't put your own flesh and blood in a cage over a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," I corrected her. "It was a calculated theft. And frankly, Odessa, whether the FBI pursues criminal charges is entirely up to First Guardian National Bank. I merely reported the identity theft to protect my credit. What the bank does to you is out of my hands." I stood up. I buttoned my suit jacket. "Here is what happens next," I said, looking down at the 3 of them. "First, I am formally stepping away from the property. Since I am the cosigner and I am no longer paying, the loan will default. You have exactly 90 days before First Guardian initiates foreclosure proceedings. You have 90 days to figure out how to pay $1,900 a month or figure out where you are going to live." Odessa gasped, pressing her hand over her mouth. "Second," I continued, turning my gaze to Brielle, "the $92,000 trust left by Grandma Yolanda has been legally transferred to Vanguard Fiduciary Services. I am still the trustee, but the funds are locked behind a corporate wall. You will never, under any circumstances, see a single dollar of that money." Brielle buried her face in her hands, letting out a loud, ugly sob. "And finally," I said, picking up my sleek black folder, "you left me a voicemail saying you were moving on without me. I accept your terms." I looked at Corvin, then Brielle, and finally Odessa. "Do not call me. Do not text me. Do not show up at my apartment. If you attempt to contact me, Evelyn will file a restraining order for harassment. Have a nice life." I turned on my heel and walked out of the conference room. I didn't wait to see if they cried. I didn't wait to hear Corvin's apologies. I walked out of the glass doors, down the hallway, and into the elevator. Julian Reed stepped into the elevator behind me. The door slid shut, sealing out the noise, sealing out the past. As the elevator descended toward the ground floor, I looked at my reflection in the polished metal doors. The exhausted, desperate daughter who had spent 6 years trying to buy love was gone. In her place was a woman who had just burned the Coleman family to the ground, and for the first time in her life, she could finally breathe. In my profession, we use a term called the cascade effect. It describes an unforeseen chain of events that occurs when a system's primary load-bearing element is suddenly removed. You don't just lose the pillar, you lose the floor, the walls, the ceiling, and eventually the entire structural integrity of the building. For the first 27 years of my life, I was the Coleman family's load-bearing pillar. I absorbed the weight, the stress, the financial shocks, and the emotional abuse, all to keep their pristine suburban roof from caving in. When I walked out of Evelyn Sterling's conference room that Friday afternoon, I didn't just walk away from my family. I pulled the pillar out from under them. And then I sat back in the quiet sanctuary of my Philadelphia apartment, and I watched gravity do exactly what gravity has always done. The first 2 weeks following the mediation meeting were defined by a profound, almost eerie silence. It was the kind of silence that happens right after a tidal wave recedes from the shoreline, just before it crashes back down with devastating force. My phone didn't ring. There were no frantic text messages from Odessa demanding I apologize. There were no manipulative, tearful voicemails from Brielle. Evelyn's threat of a restraining order, combined with the sheer, paralyzing terror of an active federal bank fraud investigation hanging over their heads had effectively muzzled them. First Guardian National Bank had quietly and officially terminated the $100,000 home equity line of credit. The money that Odessa and Brielle had already spent in their minds, the money they had committed felonies to secure, vanished into thin air. But the cascade effect doesn't happen all at once. It happens sequentially. And the first domino to fall wasn't the house. It was the white SUV. Exactly 19 days after I canceled the auto drafts on my personal checking account, the consequences of Brielle's luxury influencer lifestyle finally caught up with her in the most public, humiliating way possible. I didn't witness it firsthand, of course. I was sitting at my desk in the financial district reviewing a corporate merger file, but the suburban Grapevine is a ruthless, highly efficient communication network, and I had several old high school acquaintances who still lived in my parents' neighborhood. More importantly, Brielle lived her entire life on the internet, which meant her downfall was practically broadcast in high definition. It happened on a Tuesday morning. Brielle was in the driveway of the Colonial House filming a Get Ready With Me video for her social media followers. She was leaning against the hood of the pristine white Toyota SUV, the vehicle I had been leasing for her to the tune of $450 a month for 2 years. She was wearing designer sunglasses, holding a branded iced coffee, talking to her phone camera about manifesting abundance and hustling for your dreams. She was entirely oblivious to the heavy-duty tow truck that slowly turned onto our quiet, manicured street. The dealership's finance department had not received their payment on the first of the month. When they attempted to contact the primary leaseholder, me, they received a formal legal notice from Evelyn Sterling's office stating that I was no longer in possession of the vehicle, providing them with Brielle's exact physical address for asset recovery. According to the neighborhood gossip that inevitably filtered back to me, Brielle didn't even realize what was happening until the tow truck driver, a burly man in a neon vest, stepped out and began hooking heavy steel chains to the front axle of her dream car. Brielle dropped her iced coffee. She started screaming, running down the driveway in her expensive loungewear, demanding the man unhook her vehicle. She threatened to call the police. She threatened to sue him. She played the victim, crying hysterically, hoping the neighbors who were beginning to peek through their blinds would come to her rescue. The tow truck driver simply handed her a laminated repossession order, finished hooking up the winch, and hoisted the front wheels of the SUV off the pristine concrete. Odessa ran out of the front door in her silk robe, shrieking at the driver, her carefully cultivated image of wealthy suburban perfection completely shattering on her own front lawn. But neither tears nor shrieks can override a defaulted lease agreement. Within 10 minutes, the tow truck pulled away, dragging Brielle's primary status symbol down the street, leaving my mother and sister standing in a puddle of spilled iced coffee while half the neighborhood watched. Brielle's social media accounts went completely dark that afternoon. The facade had cracked. The illusion of the self-made boss babe was towed away for everyone to see. That was just the first domino. 10 days later, the 30-day grace period on the private health insurance premium expired. I had paid $640 a month for 2.5 years to keep Corvin and Odessa on a premium plan. When the payment failed to process, the insurance company sent a cancellation notice via certified mail. Suddenly, Odessa, who scheduled elective dermatology appointments and premium spa therapies like they were basic human rights, found herself completely uninsured. Corvin's daily blood pressure medications, which had previously cost a mere $20 copay, were now entirely out-of-pocket expenses. The invisible safety net they had taken for granted, the one they had deeply resented me for managing, was gone. They were in free fall, and the ground was approaching rapidly. But the true collapse, the absolute devastating destruction of the Coleman family unit, didn't come from the bank, the dealership, or the insurance company. It came from inside the house. To understand what happened next, you must understand the psychology of my father, Corvin. For 30 years, Corvin had practiced the art of deliberate ignorance. He survived his marriage to Odessa by simply refusing to look at the monsters lurking in the shadows. He didn't ask questions about how Odessa afforded her designer clothes. He didn't ask how Brielle paid for her luxury vacations. He assumed I was handling it, or he assumed Odessa had some magical budgeting system he simply didn't understand. But with the HELOC frozen, the car repossessed, and the lawyer's letters stacking up on the kitchen counter, Corvin could no longer hide in the dark. The monsters had dragged themselves into the living room, and they were demanding to be fed. It was the second week of December. The weather outside was freezing, a bitter prelude to winter. Inside the colonial house, the atmosphere was suffocating. The tension between Odessa and Brielle, two narcissists suddenly stripped of their resources, had turned the home into a toxic war zone. They blamed each other for the failed forgery. Brielle screamed that Odessa had pressured her into it. Odessa screamed that Brielle was a sloppy, ungrateful child who ruined everything. Corvin had retreated to his small home office, desperate to escape the shouting. He was sitting at his desk, staring blankly at his computer screen, when he noticed the stack of mail Odessa usually hid from him. Odessa had always been the one to check the mail. She controlled the flow of information in the house. But lately, she was too busy frantically calling Arthur Pendleton's office, begging him to take them back as clients, which he flatly refused, and trying to figure out how to avoid the neighbors. She had let the mail pile up in a woven basket on the console table. Corvin had brought it into his office just to clear the clutter. He began sifting through the envelopes, junk mail, utility bills. Then, he stopped. He held a thick, white envelope with the logo of a major, high-interest credit card company. It was addressed to Odessa Coleman. But the part that caught Corvin's eye was the bold red lettering stamped across the front. Final notice. Account in collections. Corvin frowned. He knew they had some credit card debt, maybe $10,000 or $15,000. Odessa had told him they were paying it down slowly. It was the reason they needed the HELOC she had claimed, to consolidate and breathe easier. His hands trembling slightly, the passive, avoidant man finally did something he hadn't done in 3 decades of marriage. He opened his wife's mail. He pulled out the multi-page statement. He flipped to the summary on the front page. His eyes scanned down to the box labeled Total Current Balance. Corvin stopped breathing. The blood roared in his ears. He blinked hard, thinking his eyes were playing tricks on him in the dim light of the office. He took off his reading glasses, rubbed his eyes, and put them back on. The number didn't change. $84,320.15. $84,000 on a single credit card. Corvin frantically flipped through the itemized pages of the statement, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The charges were a horrifying, undeniable roadmap of Odessa's vanity. Neiman Marcus, $2,400. Four Seasons Resort Spa, $1,800. Restoration Hardware, $4,500. Louis Vuitton, $3,200. Page after page of luxury goods, expensive dinners, imported home decor, and high-end cosmetics. It wasn't just this month. The statement showed a horrifying history of minimum payments and compounding predatory interest rates that were cannibalizing the balance. Corvin dug back into the mail basket. He found another envelope from a different bank. He ripped it open. Total current balance, $12,400. He found a third. A department store card. Total current balance, $8,900. He laid the statements out on his desk. He pulled out a calculator. The numbers added up to a sum so astronomical, so utterly devastating, that it physically nauseated him. Odessa wasn't in debt because of the mortgage. She wasn't in debt because of groceries or utility bills. She was over $100,000 in high-interest revolving consumer debt entirely because she was funding a fake aristocratic lifestyle she had absolutely no right to live. And suddenly, the final horrifying piece of the puzzle snapped into place in Corvin's mind. The $100,000 home equity line of credit, the desperate illegal forgery, the 31-second voicemail kicking Callista out of the family. Odessa hadn't orchestrated the HELOC fraud just to help Brielle's business or remodel the sunroom. She had committed a federal felony because her secret financial life was collapsing. She had manipulated her youngest daughter into forging her oldest daughter's signature to steal $100,000 of Callista's equity, all to secretly pay off the massive credit card debts she was hiding from her husband. She was going to take Callista's equity, wipe her own slate clean, kick Callista to the curb so she couldn't see the new lien on the mortgage statement, and continue living her delusional, luxurious life as if nothing had happened. For 30 years, Corvin Coleman had chosen the path of least resistance. He had let his wife bully his eldest child. He had looked the other way. He had justified his silence by telling himself he was keeping the peace. But staring at the irrefutable, printed proof of his wife's profound sociopathic selfishness, the dam finally broke. The decades of suppressed resentment, cowardice, and guilt violently imploded. Corvin stood up. He grabbed the stack of credit card statements in his fist. He walked out of his office, his heavy footsteps echoing on the hardwood floor. He walked into the kitchen. Odessa was sitting at the marble island, aggressively typing on her laptop, trying to find a new lawyer who would take their case without a massive retainer fee they no longer had. "Odessa," Corvin said. His voice wasn't the usual passive murmur. It was a low, terrifying growl. Odessa didn't even look up. "Not right now, Corvin. I am trying to fix the disaster your ungrateful daughter caused. We have 60 days before the bank sends the notice of default on the mortgage, and I need a lawyer to force Callista to resume payments." Corvin walked over to the island. He didn't ask. He didn't cower. He slammed the stack of credit card statements down onto the imported Italian marble with a sound like a gunshot. Odessa jumped, her head snapping up. "What is wrong with you? Don't slam things on my counter." Corvin pointed a shaking finger at the top statement, the one with the $84,320 balance. "What is this, Odessa?" he demanded, his voice rising, vibrating with a fury she had never, ever heard from him before. "What the hell is this?" Odessa's eyes darted to the paper. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking sickly and pale. The mask of control slipped, revealing the terrified, cornered woman beneath it. She tried to snatch the papers away, but Corvin slammed his hand down on top of them, pinning them to the counter. "I asked you a question," Corvin roared. The sound of his own shouting shocked him, but he couldn't stop. The fury was a living thing inside him now. $84,000, Louis Vuitton, restoration hardware. While Callista was working 80-hour weeks to pay the mortgage on the roof over your head, you were secretly racking up $100,000 in debt to buy purses to impress women who don't even like you? "Keep your voice down," Odessa hissed, glancing frantically toward the stairs, terrified the neighbors might hear through the windows. "You don't understand how these things work, Corvin. It's business expenses. It's investments in the home's value." "Don't lie to me," Corvin screamed, leaning over the counter, his face inches from hers. "You manipulated Brielle into forging Callista's signature. You committed a felony. You tried to steal $100,000 of your own daughter's equity to pay off your secret shopping addiction, and then you threw her away like garbage." "She is garbage," Odessa shrieked back, her own rage finally exploding, dropping the victim act entirely. "She's a cold, calculating little bitch who never loved us. She held her money over my head for years. She owed us that equity, Corvin. I raised her. I fed her. That house is mine. She paid for it," Corvin yelled, tears of absolute rage and shame streaming down his face. "She paid for everything. She paid for your insurance. She paid for Brielle's car. She paid for your damn mortgage while you were secretly bankrupting us. She didn't owe you anything. You leached off of her, and I stood by and let you do it because I was too much of a coward to stop you." Brielle appeared at the top of the stairs, her eyes wide, terrified by the screaming. She had never heard her father raise his voice in her entire life. "Dad?" Brielle whimpered. Corvin looked up at his youngest daughter, the golden child, the one who had conspired with her ex-boyfriend to commit federal fraud. "And you," Corvin sneered, the disgust in his voice thick and heavy, "you let her talk you into it. You forged your sister's name. You're exactly like her, Brielle. You're vain, you're selfish, and you're going to end up with nothing." "Corvin, stop it!" Odessa screamed, grabbing his arm. "You're scaring her!" Corvin violently yanked his arm out of her grasp. He looked at his wife, truly looked at her, and saw nothing but a stranger, a parasite dressed in designer clothing. "The bank is going to foreclose on this house, Odessa," Corvin said, his voice dropping back to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "Because Callista is gone, and I cannot pay a $1,900 mortgage on top of the $100,000 in debt you've secretly chained to my name." He stepped back from the island. "You wanted to move on without her? Congratulations. You got your wish. You have no money, you have no lawyer, and you have no daughter." Corvin turned his back on his wife, walked to the front closet, grabbed his winter coat, and walked out the front door. He didn't know where he was going. He just knew he couldn't spend another second inside the toxic, crumbling monument to his wife's vanity. Inside the house, Odessa Coleman sank to the floor of her gourmet kitchen, surrounded by her unpaid bills, and finally began to weep. The social collapse of the Coleman family followed swiftly after the internal implosion. It is a universal truth of the suburbs that you cannot keep a secret once the money runs out. Within a month of the confrontation, the first official notice of default arrived via certified mail from First Guardian National Bank. The mortgage was 60 days past due. The legal process of foreclosure had formally begun. Odessa tried to spin the narrative, of course. She attended her church social group and tearfully claimed that Callista had suffered a mental breakdown, become dangerously unstable, and abandoned the family, leaving them in a terrible financial bind. She tried to play the role of the tragic, heartbroken mother. But the truth is much louder than a lie, especially when the truth has a paper trail. My aunt, Odessa's older sister, called Evelyn Sterling's office, attempting to demand answers on Odessa's behalf. Evelyn, operating with surgical precision, didn't argue. She simply informed my aunt that as a matter of public record, the property was entering foreclosure due to severe delinquency and that any further inquiries should be directed to the federal fraud investigators at First Guardian National Bank, who were currently looking into a forged power of attorney. That was all it took. The word fraud dropped into the family gossip pool like a boulder. Suddenly, the extended family stopped returning Odessa's calls. The neighbors who had witnessed the white SUV being towed began whispering in the grocery store aisles. The pristine, untouchable image Odessa had spent her entire life and all of my money to build was completely obliterated. She was no longer the tragic victim. She was the neighborhood pariah. Sitting in my apartment, watching the winter snow begin to fall over Philadelphia, I felt the strange, profound sense of peace. My emergency savings account was growing exponentially. The suffocating anxiety that used to grip my chest every time my phone buzzed was completely gone. I was sleeping 8 hours a night. I had even started dating again, going out to dinners without silently calculating if I had enough left in my checking account to cover Odessa's next fabricated emergency. I had established a boundary made of solid steel, and the people who used to walk all over me were currently shattering their teeth trying to bite through it. But a cornered animal will always make one final, desperate lunge. In late January, exactly 75 days after the mediation meeting, my phone buzzed with an incoming text message from an unknown number. I was sitting in a coffee shop enjoying a latte that I had bought with my own money simply because I wanted it. I picked up my phone and opened the message. "Callista, please. It's Brielle. Mom took my phone. I bought a burner." The bank sent the final 90-day notice. They're going to auction the house in March. Dad moved into a motel. Mom just cries all day. I have nowhere to go. Please, Callista. I know I messed up. I know what I did was illegal. I'll do anything. Just unlock Grandma's trust so we can pay the past due balance and save the house. You're my sister. Please don't let us become homeless. I read the message twice. I read the desperation, the panic, and the complete lack of true accountability. She didn't say, "I'm sorry for betraying you." She said, "I'm sorry because I'm facing the consequences." She was still trying to access the $92,000 trust. She was still trying to find a shortcut out of the fire she had helped set. For 6 years, a message like this would have sent me into a blind panic. I would have called her, wired her money, and sacrificed my own stability to fix her mess. I would have believed that saving her was my duty as a sister. But I wasn't that girl anymore. The financial risk analyst looked at the toxic portfolio one last time, recognized the absolute impossibility of rehabilitation, and closed the file permanently. I didn't reply. I didn't type out a long, angry paragraph explaining why she was wrong. I didn't gloat. I didn't engage. I tapped the screen, selected the unknown number, and pressed block contact. The screen went dark. I picked up my latte, looked out the window at the falling snow, and enjoyed the beautiful, magnificent silence of my own life. There was only one piece of business left to conclude. The 90-day clock I had set in Evelyn's office was rapidly approaching its final hour, and I had one last surprise waiting in the vault of Grandma Yolanda's trust. The house was going to fall, but I was going to make absolutely certain that the ground it stood on was salted forever. The 90-day clock expired not with an explosive bang, but with the dull, bureaucratic thud of a judge's gavel. March arrived, sweeping the last remnants of winter out of Philadelphia. True to Evelyn Sterling's exact calculations, First Guardian National Bank had shown absolutely zero mercy. When my mother, Odessa, failed to produce the $1,900 monthly mortgage payments for 3 consecutive months, and with the property already flagged in their system for severe state-level notary fraud, the bank moved with ruthless, terrifying efficiency. They did not offer a forbearance plan. They did not entertain Arthur Pendleton's desperate last-minute replacement lawyer. They simply foreclosed. I was informed of the final proceedings via a sterile, automated email from the title company. The sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house, the monument to Odessa's vanity, the pristine brick-faced prison that I had poured $68,400 of my own lifeblood into, was officially seized and scheduled for public auction. I didn't drive out to the suburbs to watch them leave. I didn't need to see the moving trucks backing into the driveway or watch the neighbors peeking through their blinds as Odessa's imported Italian marble was traded for cardboard boxes. The mental image of my mother, stripped of her curated aesthetic, forced to pack her designer handbags into a rented U-Haul while Brielle wept over her ruined influencer career, was enough. I had successfully excised the tumor. I didn't need to watch it wither in the medical waste bin. Instead, I packed a small carry-on bag, drove to the airport, and boarded a direct flight to Portland, Oregon. For 6 years, I had never taken a real vacation. Every dollar of paid time off I accrued had been spent managing my family's manufactured crises or working overtime to cover their ballooning expenses. I had never seen the Pacific Ocean. I had never stood on a coastline and felt the overwhelming, terrifying, beautiful vastness of the world. I rented a small cabin on the rugged Oregon coast, perched on a cliff overlooking the churning slate gray water. The air there was completely different from the concrete canyons of Philadelphia. It was sharp, salty, and cold, stinging my cheeks in a way that made me feel profoundly, undeniably alive. It was my 3rd day in Portland. I was standing on the wooden deck of the cabin, a thick wool sweater wrapped around me, a hot cup of black coffee warming my hands. The sky was an unbroken expanse of iron gray, blending seamlessly into the horizon. The sound of the waves crashing against the jagged rocks below was deafening, drowning out the silence that had plagued my apartment for months. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in over 2 months. Corvin Coleman. My father. I stared at the screen, watching it vibrate against my palm. He wasn't blocked. I had blocked Odessa and Brielle the moment I walked out of Evelyn's office, but I had left Corvin's line open. Not out of hope, and certainly not out of love. I left it open because the risk analyst in me knew that eventually a collapsing system always produces one final, desperate distress signal. I needed to hear it, just to definitively close the file. I swiped the green button and pressed the phone to my ear. "Hello, Corvin?" I said. My voice was calm, steady, and entirely devoid of warmth. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. I could hear the faint sound of traffic passing by, the hollow, tinny echo of a cheap room. "Callista!" Corvin's voice finally came through. It sounded paper-thin. It was the voice of a man who had been hollowed out, scraped clean of whatever passive dignity he once possessed. You didn't change your number." "No," I replied, looking out at the crashing waves. "I didn't." Another agonizing pause. Agonizing. He was struggling to breathe, the weight of his own profound failure suffocating him. "I'm at a motel," he said quietly. "A Motel 6 out by the interstate. The bank locked the doors on the house yesterday morning. A sheriff's deputy came and escorted us off the property. Your mother, she's staying on a friend's couch. Brielle is bouncing between whatever acquaintances she has left." He swallowed hard, the sound wet and pathetic over the receiver. "We lost everything, Callista. The house, the cars, the insurance, the credit cards are in default. We are completely, totally bankrupt." "I am aware of the math, Corvin," I said clinically. "I warned you 90 days ago. Gravity is entirely predictable." "I know," he whispered. "I know. And I'm sorry. I am so sorry, Callista. I should have stopped them. I should have walked into that living room and ripped up that forged paper. I should have protected you. I was a coward. I failed you as a father. I know that now. I have to live with that for the rest of my life." I closed my eyes, letting the cold wind whip my hair across my face. His apology was genuine. I could hear the absolute crushing remorse in his tone. He finally understood the cost of his 30 years of silence. But an apology does not rebuild a burned bridge. An apology is simply the acknowledgement of the ashes. "I accept your apology, Dad," I said quietly. I heard him exhale a shuddering breath, a sound of profound relief. He thought the magic words had worked. He thought the transaction of forgiveness was complete. And then he proved exactly why I had walked away. "Callista," he continued, his voice shifting, taking on that familiar, pleading tone I had heard 1,000 times before. "Sweetheart, I need a favor. Just one. Just to get us off the streets." My eyes snapped open. I stared at the dark, churning ocean. The disappointment was a physical ache in my chest, but I wasn't surprised. With enablers, the apology is never the destination. The apology is just the vehicle they use to arrive at the next demand. "Go on," I said coldly. "I found a small apartment," Corvin explained, speaking quickly now, terrified I would hang up. 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy, just a place for me, your mother, and Brielle to regroup. But my credit is destroyed. Odessa's credit is destroyed. The leasing office ran our background checks and saw the active foreclosure and the debt collections. They won't approve us." He paused, gathering his nerve. "If you could just co-sign the lease," Corvin begged. "Just the lease. You wouldn't even have to pay the rent. I have my salary. I can cover the monthly payments. I just need your perfect credit score to secure the unit. Please, Callista. It's just a signature. We are your family. You can't let us live in a motel." I let the crashing of the waves fill the silence for a full 10 seconds. He had learned absolutely nothing. He had just apologized for letting his wife and daughter commit a felony to steal my equity by forging my signature, and in the very next breath, he was asking me to legally bind my name to their financial liabilities again. He wanted the invisible pillar back. "No," I said. One syllable, hard as a diamond. Corvin gasped as if I had struck him. "Callista, please." I said no, Corvin. I cut him off, my voice rising above the sound of the wind. "I am not co-signing a lease. I am not co-signing a loan. I am not giving you a dime. You allowed my mother to treat me like a human ATM, and when I stopped dispensing cash, you stood by while they tried to rob me blind. I am not your safety net anymore. You are a 55-year-old man. Figure it out." "We can't," Corvin cried out, panic completely overtaking him. "We have no cash for a security deposit. The only asset we have left is Grandma Yolanda's trust fund. Callista, as the trustee, you have to unlock it. You have to authorize a disbursement of the $92,000. It's an emergency. We are facing homelessness." I smiled. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a chess player moving their queen into the final fatal position. Yes," I murmured softly. "Grandma Yolanda and Grandpa Alphonse's trust. I was wondering when you would bring that up." "You have to release it to us," Corvin pleaded. "It's family money." "You're right, Corvin," I said, leaning against the wooden railing of the deck. "It was family money. But Grandma Yolanda was a very, very smart woman. She saw right through Odessa. She knew exactly how greedy your wife was, and she knew exactly how weak you were. She knew that the second she died, Odessa would try to sink her claws into that $92,000. "What are you talking about?" Corvin asked, his voice trembling with a sudden, new dread. "When Yolanda drafted that trust, she didn't just stipulate that I was the sole trustee." I explained, the satisfaction rolling off my tongue like smooth, aged whiskey. She included a very specific, legally binding conditional clause. In corporate finance, we call it a poison pill. It's a defense mechanism designed to prevent hostile takeovers. A poison pill?" "Yes," I said. The clause stated that the funds were to be used for the education and medical emergencies of her descendants. However, it also explicitly stated that if any beneficiary of the trust, namely Odessa, Brielle, or you, committed any act of financial abuse, fraud, or theft against the designated trustee, their right to the funds would be immediately and permanently revoked. I heard a sharp intake of breath over the phone. "Last Friday," I continued, my voice echoing with absolute, unquestionable finality, "I sat down with Evelyn Sterling and the corporate managers at Vanguard Fiduciary Services. I presented them with the police report detailing Brielle's identity theft, the forged power of attorney, and the suspended first guardian HELOC. I provided empirical proof of financial abuse and attempted fraud." "Callista..." "No," Corvin whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "The corporate fiduciaries reviewed the evidence," I said. "They confirmed the breach of contract. The poison pill was triggered, and per Grandma Yolanda's exact brilliant legal instructions, upon the revocation of the beneficiary's rights, the entirety of the $92,000 trust was to be immediately liquidated and donated to an alternate beneficiary." "You didn't," Corvin choked out, sobbing now. "Tell me you didn't." "I signed the authorization papers on Monday morning, right before I got on my flight," I said smoothly. $92,000 was wired directly into a charitable endowment fund, providing college scholarships for underprivileged young women studying finance in the state of Pennsylvania. The money is gone, Corvin. Every single cent of it. It's helping girls who actually want to work for a living, instead of girls who forge documents to buy designer handbags. The silence on the phone was absolute. I could hear him weeping, the broken, pathetic sounds of a man who had finally reached the absolute bottom of the abyss his own cowardice had dug for him. He had no house, he had no credit, he had no trust fund, and he had no daughter. You did this, Corvin, I said quietly, the anger finally bleeding out of me, leaving nothing but a vast, clean emptiness. Odessa lit the match. Brielle poured the gasoline, but you stood there and watched the house burn down because you were too afraid to grab a fire extinguisher. You let them try to destroy me. Callista, don't ever call this number again, I said. I didn't wait for him to say goodbye. I pulled the phone away from my ear, tapped the red button, and ended the call. Then, with deliberate, unhurried movements, I opened my phone settings, navigated to the contact labeled Corvin Coleman, and pressed block. I slipped the phone back into the pocket of my wool coat. I looked out at the Pacific Ocean. The gray clouds above were beginning to fracture, allowing a few piercing rays of golden afternoon sunlight to strike the churning water below. The wind howled around me, but for the first time in 27 years, I wasn't shivering. I was warm. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, salty air. I thought about the $147,000 I had lost. I thought about the house that was gone, the family that was shattered, and the brutal, ugly war I had fought in conference rooms and bank lobbies. It was a heavy price to pay for an education, but as I stood there on the edge of the continent, looking out at an endless horizon that belonged entirely to me, I knew it was worth every single penny. I had learned the hardest, most vital lesson a person can ever learn. Loyalty is not a blank check. Love does not require you to set yourself on fire simply to keep someone else warm. Being needed by parasites is not the same thing as being valued, and setting a boundary is not an act of cruelty. Setting a boundary is the ultimate act of self-preservation. It is the moment you stop apologizing for protecting the life you have bled to build. My name is Callista Coleman. I am 27 years old, and for the first time in my entire life, every dollar I make, every breath I take, and every choice I make belongs quietly, ordinarily, and beautifully to me. If this story meant something to you, or if you've ever been the one holding everything together for a family that never truly appreciated your sacrifice, take a moment to let me know. Tap the like button so more people who might be suffocating under that same weight can find this video. Share it with someone who desperately needs the reminder that their boundaries matter too. I'd really love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to protect you? Leave a comment below. I read every single one. Thank you so much for listening to my story. Please hit that subscribe button to join our community, and I will see you in the next one. Stay strong and protect your peace.